Hi, good morning. My name is Martha Alvarez, and I'm a legislative advocate for the Association of California School Administrators, or ACSA. On behalf of ACSA, my colleague Amanda Dickey from the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association, or CCSESA, and the California Department of Education would like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Over the next hour, you will hear from the California Department of Education staff on relevant information from the 2018-19 state budget related to early childhood education programs. This information includes the latest on funding opportunities available to local educational agencies and other providers, for specifically trying to focus on how do we integrate and better support our students with exceptional needs or students with disabilities. There's also other changes related to policies at the state level that will be affecting school districts and other providers throughout over the course of the next year. There'll be a discussion about some of those opportunities for your engagement in this program regulations and changes to policies. And lastly, you'll also hear about the vision for including more kids in California and how we strive to expand access. Over the last 2 years, the legislature and the governor have made improvements to state policies with the focus and goal of trying to improve access for California early childhood education. Specifically, there's been targeted resources trying to improve this access across the state. We hope the information in today's webinar will encourage many more educational agencies and other providers to participate in these programs and to be able to leverage more funding opportunities to increase access, specifically for children with disabilities and those with exceptional needs. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items, just a friendly reminder. First, if you have any questions, we encourage you to ask them through the chat box. It will be available throughout the webinar, and the presenters will aim to answer those questions either throughout the presentation or at the end of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded, and the materials will be available on the ACSA website by the end of the week. That website is acsa.org/GR webinars. We also have a fact sheet and other resources that will be available on our website. Lastly, we invite you to join us for a second webinar as part of this series on Wednesday, November 14th at 9 a.m. This webinar will feature several school districts and county offices who will share best practices and strategies to leverage different funding sources. We encourage you to join fellow practitioners who have overcome barriers to increase access to early childhood education in our state. Again, to register and to access other materials from today's presentation, please visit www.acsa.org/GR webinars. Thank you again, and I'll now turn it over to one of our presenters, Virginia Early from CDE.
Thank you so much, Martha, and for everyone for joining us. So, as Martha mentioned, we have a group here from CDE to present some issues to you. Sorry about that. To share recent policy changes affecting early learning and care that happened either through the budget or through recent bills, and also share some available funding opportunities. So my name is Virginia Early. I work in the Early Education Care Division at the Department of Education on policy issues. So the first thing that we wanted to share with you is a new option that school districts have for layering state preschool programs with their transitional kindergarten programs. There was language in the 2018-19 budget that clarified that school districts can serve 4-year-old children in state preschool classrooms in the same classroom as children being served in transitional kindergarten if certain requirements are met. And those requirements are that the classroom is taught by a teacher with a teaching credential similar to transitional kindergarten, that the adult-to-child ratio is 1 to 8, which is similar to state preschool, and that the sort of quality assessment tool, the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale used in state preschool is also completed for the classroom, and that children are evaluated using the Desired Results Developmental Profile, which is a tool that teachers use to do child observations and adapt their curriculum. So it sort of sets out ways that school districts can combine these two sets of children in one classroom, while ensuring that the children are learning from a teacher with a teaching credential and also those other quality components of state preschool. So in addition, the trailer bill also has some more information about a license-exempt state preschool change that happened in the 17-18 budget. Many of you may be aware that the 17-18 budget set forth policy changes stating that beginning July 1 of 2019, state preschools run by LEAs that meet certain requirements similar to those for kindergarten classrooms will be exempt from licensing requirements through the Department of Social Services. And so when this was passed in the 17-18 budget, there was a requirement that the Legislative Analyst's Office convene a work group of LEAs and non-LEAs practicing in the field to determine if there were certain health and safety requirements that CDE should add to the state preschool program when licensing went away. And so the LAO came out with some recommendations. For example, one recommendation is that outdoor shade be safe and good repair. Another recommendation is some things around bathrooms and around visual supervision of children at all times. And the legislature said, basically put these recommendations into statute and has required CDE to make changes to Title V based on those recommendations. And so we're currently working on developing those regulations. Our timeline is to get them into the Office of Administrative Law in the spring of 2019 so that they'll be effective starting July 1, 2019, just in time for the law around licensing to change. In addition, with the exemption from licensing, the LAO work group recommended, and the legislature has implemented some changes to the universal complaint procedure, specifically for state preschools in these areas, to basically expedite complaints, so that there is a health and safety issue, that it can be addressed in a more timely manner. While also streamlining this process with other existing processes that school districts already have. Okay, pushed it too hard. So moving on to other bills that were passed in the process, Assembly Bill 2626, or AB 2626, was a bill that the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlington, sponsored. And the reason that he sponsored this bill is that the child care pilot programs in many counties had tested out a number of different policy options, and what we found when improving those pilot plans is that give certain flexibility, is that many counties wanted the same flexibility. And so this bill is intended to make equitable changes across the state that give everyone access to these policies that were tested out in certain pilot counties. So more specifically, this bill, which is effective starting July 1st, 2019, increases the initial income eligibility threshold in the California State Preschool Program and other CDE early learning programs to 85% of state median income. It's currently at 70% of state median income. It also expands the age eligibility and removes some restrictions for children that can be served in state preschool, which means that children that are slightly younger that can be served, and state preschool programs can serve more 3-year-olds than previously they were able to do. Finally, there's some increased voluntary transfer of funds so that folks can better earn their contracts. And there are also 2 paid professional development days, which we're really excited about because this is built into the funding that programs receive, and it gives them some flexibility to really make sure that their staff are up to date and have that time to have that professional development, not on the weekends and evenings. Finally, CDE is going to incorporate these changes into the funding terms and conditions for contracts, and we're also planning on issuing further guidance through a management bulletin in the spring of 2019. So AB 2698 is another bill that the governor just signed. This one takes effect January 1st, 2019, so a little bit earlier than the other one. And this bill really provides support around early childhood mental health. So it does it in sort of two ways. It creates a definition of early childhood mental health consultation services. It's basically services that can offer provider support to effectively respond to all children, but especially children with challenging behaviors, children with disabilities, and other special needs. To support this new defined activity, it allows programs to claim an adjustment factor for children where in settings where early childhood mental health consultation services are provided. And so it essentially allows providers to spend the money that they already have to support these programs by providing these services. So it makes it an allowable expense. And you can see on the slide, this adjustment factor is available in the California State Preschool Program and infants and toddlers in a general child care center and children birth to 5 and a family child care network funded by the general child care funding source. I'll close up the relevant legislation section here with just a note to several other bills that affect our programs, but are maybe of slightly less interest to you all. There's AB 2960, which basically requires CDE to work with stakeholders to develop an online portal which will basically provide information to parents, a one-stop shop on early learning and care. And there's a process laid out in that bill for doing so. AB 605 requires the Department of Social Services to develop a single child care license that would serve infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and school-age children, all under one license, so streamlining and creating administrative efficiencies for programs, but obviously keeping the different health and safety requirements that depend on the child's age. And finally, AB 2370, similar to some changes that have been happening recently in K-12, requires child care centers to have their drinking water tested for lead contamination every 5 years, and states some procedures for doing so and what happens if lead is discovered. CDE is planning on collaborating with the Department of Social Services and releasing information as they move along in the process for these bills. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Wright, and I'm the Director of the Special Education Division at the California Department of Education. And I'm excited to be here today to share some funding opportunities that will be coming out in requests for application in the coming months. And I am grateful to be able to talk to you about this today, and that the governor put a significant amount of money in his final budget to support the efforts that I know the special education community as well as the greater community has been looking for around how do we help to create one coherent system of education that really looks at all students as general ed students first. And looking at the early care, early learning and child care as really the on-ramp to families and children being included in our communities and in our schooling with their general ed peers. And in terms of sort of the foundation of that, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act lays out some pretty specific ideologies around including kids with disabilities, with children without disabilities from the earliest point possible, which are our child care, early learning, and preschool settings. And so really, I think this opportunity could not come at a better time as we work towards this vision of one coherent system of education, ensuring that our students with disabilities are included. And so there'll be two grants that I'll be talking about this morning. The first one is a fairly significant $167 million for Inclusive Early Education Expansion Program. And that will be one-time funds that LEAs will apply for to cover infrastructure costs, including facility renovations, equipment, and professional learning and development. The second is $10 million inclusive early learning and care program, and that will be a grant to county offices of education for building local and regional capacity for inclusive early learning. And so as we're collaboratively working with our partners in early childhood at the department, the two RFAs, the $10 million will move out first, and that will be intended to help support the $167 million that will also be going out this fall. So we've had a few questions. Can the grant be spent on new facilities? We're still working with finance to better understand the intent and with our CDE folks to understand what is allowable. So more to come on that with the RFA. And more details, specific details will be coming out as the RFA is developed over this next month. Moving on, so in terms of inclusion in early childhood programs, really we're looking at access to inclusive environments from the first point possible. In California, there is an overwhelming statewide commitment to increasing access to general education for our students with disabilities. Many of you know that as the least restrictive environment in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This past year, California trended down around access to the least restrictive environment for preschool, and it is our hope, belief, and plan to see those numbers increase back up with this funding and a larger commitment to preschool in general. We know that early intervention and early detection of potential issues for children are substantially mitigated when we address them early. And so as we continue to work with our early childhood partners, you'll be hearing more about this moving forward. The program coordination really fosters that development and educational continuum of support. Again, that starts really early with a multi-tiered system of support, really starting in preschool. And the research as well speaks to that. There we go. I'd like to point out a Dear Colleague letter that we'll also be sending out in the form of a guidance letter in the next month that I think you'll find helpful. And this really provides the backbone of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA, which is the foundation by which we operate and monitor programs and support programs in California in special education. So this Dear Colleague letter joint statement really describes what I discussed earlier, which is that all children, regardless of their level of disability and severity of need, have the right to be educated with their peers. And so we hope that you'll take advantage of this funding in order to further that purpose and mission so that we can start at the beginning with parents and families feeling a sense of belonging and having their children be part of our one coherent system of education. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague to my left here, who are in charge.
I'm Stephen Chu, and I'm with the Early Learning and Care Division at the Department of Education, and I'm here to go over some of the various funding opportunities that we have currently available and a couple that are coming up very soon. Okay, so first up we have the California State Preschool Program. The purpose of this program is to expand CSPP services for eligible families with children ages 3 and 4 years old in safe, healthy, age-appropriate, and quality educational environments. Funding for this program is awarded in the form of a contract, and there is approximately $112 million available this fiscal year. This opportunity is available to existing contractors as well as new contractors with the CDE. you're interested in applying, you'll want to keep an eye on our website. The request for applications is scheduled to be released in late October 2018. We'll also hold a webinar in early November 2018 where we'll go over the program overview and details about the application itself and eligibility requirements and all of that. So you'll want to tune in for that if you're interested in applying. If you're interested in applying, again, you can mail or hand deliver the application to the address listed on the slide here at 1430 N Street, Suite 3410. And if you have any questions about the CSPP program in particular, you can send an email to our email box at cspprfa@cde.ca.gov. And next up, we have the General Child Care and Development Program, also known as CCTR. This program is provided to create direct child care and development services to California children up to age 13. This program, there is $8.1 million available, and it's also awarded in the form of a contract like the CSPP program. We're also expecting to release the RFA at the end of October as well. And please refer to the RFA once it gets posted for more information about the program and eligibility and application requirements and all of that. And again, if you have any questions about the CCTR program in particular, you can send an email to our email box for that particular program at cctrrfa@cde.ca.gov. The next opportunity we have is the Child Care Facilities Revolving Fund. And this fund is for the purchase of new and relocatable child care facilities. And this is an interest-free loan program. You may repay it over the period of up to 10 years, and there's currently $26.8 million available. Something to keep in mind is that this loan in particular is only available to current CDE contractors, so serving CDE subsidized children. Applications are accepted on a continuous basis, however, until funding is exhausted. If you're interested in applying, you can take a look at our website here, listed on the slide, or send an email to ccfrf@cde.ca.gov if you have any questions about the program. And finally, we have the California Renovation and Repair Loan Program. As the name implies, this loan is used to assist with the cost of renovating and repairing existing facilities in order to meet health and safety compliance standards, ADA compliance, and things of that nature. Similar to the general facilities loan, it's also interest-free, and there's a repayment period of up to 10 years. And once again, this loan is only available to current CDE contractors, and there's also the $26.8 million as it comes from the same sort of bucket of money as the Child Care Facilities Revolving Fund.
So we want to thank ACSA for allowing us this opportunity to speak with you today, and also to say thank you for your partnership in ensuring that our children across California have access to great early education programs and childcare, and want you to know that we're here to partner with you and to support you. So please reach out, whether it's to the Early Childhood Division or the Special Ed Division if you have additional questions. And I know we're going to see if there are additional questions for this webinar. But again, thank you and hope you all have a great day.
And in the meantime, before we conclude, since there might be questions out in the field, thank you to the presenters. I do want to emphasize the importance about today's webinar and the information you receive from our panelists. A lot of information was shared with you very quickly, and a lot of great details underlying those different programs and funding opportunities. As I mentioned beforehand, we will be posting on our website a fact sheet with additional information about those different program funding opportunities and policy changes. In addition to that, I think the underscoring point from ACSA and CCSESA, as it was alluded to by the speakers, we really want to ensure that the field feels informed of what the opportunities are here in California. Over the past 2 years, we have been really trying hard in trying to make the legislature notice opportunities to improve access in California. We have heard from administrators across the state about some of the barriers you have faced and challenges with some of the requirements that might be too onerous. And to this end, the information shared with you today, having improvements to the system to try to make it easier and more accessible for families in California to be eligible, and also for local educational agencies to be true partners in meeting the needs of California's children. So we want to encourage you to really think about these funding opportunities. How can you further engage with the Department of Education in the regulatory process in the spring regarding the UCP and changes to the Title V regulations for the flexibilities on school facilities. In addition to that, I want to underscore something that Stephen mentioned as an opportunity of funding. There's over $100 million of ongoing funding for the state full-day preschool program. For the past 2 years, the schools have not been, and providers have not been able to apply for this funding. Therefore, the money keeps coming back to the legislature, and it gives the impression that there's not enough strong interest from the field in accessing these different funding sources. So we really want to ensure that you feel that you have the sufficient information to pursue these funding opportunities, particularly to full-day preschool programs. We understand there's still a lot of other opportunities to improve the system, but in the meantime, there are kids in California who are eligible for preschool, who are ready to be served. We encourage for any of those of you on the webinar for school district leaders, superintendents, deputy superintendents, to work with your county offices and with your school site leaders, including principals and early education coordinators, to determine how can you integrate these opportunities as part of your local control and accountability plan discussions at the local level, how to engage your teachers association and your school governing board members and parents as part of accessing in California. So with that sort of friendly reminder about the importance of today's information, we'll see if there's any questions. I think I see a couple in the chat box. So please definitely type other questions that you'd like to get answered from our panelists today. The first one, does CCTR have a priority for infant and toddler, or does it have to be equal opportunities for school age 2?
So in terms of the CCTR RFA, as Stephen mentioned, that RFA is still under development, and it's going to be released at the end of October. So at this point, there is some conversation about having a priority for infants and toddlers, but the final details of the RFA will be released when the RFA is released. And as Stephen mentioned, we'll be also doing a deep dive webinar into exactly what that RFA looks like in early November. So if you're interested in applying for these spots, we'd encourage you both to stay tuned for that RFA and follow up with us to sign up and attend our webinar that we're presenting with more specifics about this.
And definitely, I see a couple more questions from the audience. This is for Kristen. Will the 2 new grants include language that funding is contingent upon LEA being able to prove or justify how the funds were spent after being awarded? In other words, will that accountability piece be in place so that the monies truly go towards increasing inclusion in early education?
Those details will be worked out in the RFA, but I can tell you today that is absolutely our intent to ensure that those funds are spent as designed. So yes, I can't tell you exactly to what degree, but the answer is yes.
And I'll just add to that. So the language itself, if any of you are following along with the handout that Martha sent over, in section 17 of the trailer bill of AB 1808 is where it really discusses the 176 million. And that language provides some clear things that the department is supposed to be asking for in applications. And one of those things that the department is supposed to be asking for is having people applying quantify the number of additional subsidized children proposed to be served, including children with special needs or exceptional needs. So that's something we're going to be looking for as we develop the RFA, making sure these funds are actually increasing capacity for inclusive early learning and care services.
Good question.
The other question we had earlier in the webinar was regarding whether this funding could be used for professional development, and the answer is yes. I don't know if you want to allude to any additional information regarding that.
Yes, so the 167 million is for one-time infrastructure costs, and finance has defined that broadly as sort of the costs that might be needed to, for example, adaptive and universal facility design renovations, adaptive equipment, if there's some equipment that's necessary for a classroom in order to make it inclusive, and professional development. For example, if teachers need additional training or resources to help them be better at including children with exceptional needs in inclusive settings. So the funds are supposed to be for one-time expenditures that fall into these three categories.
The other question, it might be for Virginia, are independent charter schools eligible for state preschool funding?
I think I'm looking at Stephen right now for those that can't tell because he's not in the frame.
If you don't have the answer today, we can follow up with you, or perhaps in the next webinar we can address the question.
Yeah, we will work to get that information to Martha for follow-up.
And I think ultimately, and this is a good question, thank you for the audience regarding the charter school opportunity, because each of the laws are written separately and differently. The regulations might be, one thing for some and some for other. We always look at the definition of what is a local educational agency, and whenever the statute does define local educational agency, it would include charter schools. We have to look at the specific language regarding the opportunity if it's available for charter schools, and we can answer that question separately.
I believe it is, but like Martha said, the definition changes somewhat depending on which part of the statute you're looking at. So we'll definitely confirm and provide that information.
Let's see, there was another question regarding the, to our staff, if they could please go up to the question. Let's see. Does CCTR have, and that one already has been addressed. What is the difference between the two facility-related loans?
So I can answer that one as well. So there's sort of two main loans in the child care facilities and revolving loan funds. There's a loan that is for portable facilities on school district-owned land, and that's essentially buying and the department essentially buys that facility, and then the contractor repays it over lease payments over a period of 10 years, interest-free, and owns it at the end. The other program is what's called, I believe Stephen in his presentation refers to it as the CURL program, or the California Renovation and Repair Loan. This loan, rather than acquiring a portable facility, is specifically to assist child care providers in meeting health and safety compliance rules that are maybe part of licensing, and helping them become compliant with ADA. So if there's, say, something that is preventing a provider from complying with licensing standards, this fund is available to help providers get to where they need to go, make sure the facilities are safe for children, and provide that extra support to get there. And similarly, this loan is also interest-free and can be repaid over a period of 10 years. So they're two interest-free loans, but one of them is really more for renovation and repairs based on health and safety standards and ADA, and the other one is really helping folks acquire a portable facility. Thank you for that question.
So we'll wait another minute or two and see if there's other questions. In the meantime, we do want to encourage you to join the webinar again on November 14th. Today you got to hear from CDE staff regarding the opportunities that they're working on here at the state level. But on November 14th, you'll hear directly from practitioners who have had the experience in being able to leverage these different funding opportunities, not the ones discussed today because they're new funding opportunities, but definitely as an example, the full-day preschool program. In California, over 80% of school districts who provide preschool do part-day preschool, and so we want to hear from those districts that have been successful in being able to expand their program to full access, full day throughout the school year. And we also want to encourage you as you continue to consider how the opportunities to apply for this funding options, to do share with ACSA and CCSESA any of the existing barriers that still are preventing you from accessing the different funding opportunities. We really want to thank the Department of Education for working with the legislature and other stakeholders, including the Department of Finance, to look for ways to simplify the regulations, to better integrate and align our different early education programs from preschool to TK and looking at kindergarten as well. And as Kristen mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, how do we ensure that we better integrate general education with special education, students with disabilities at an earlier age? How do we ensure that we close that school readiness gap before kids enter kindergarten? And that starts with early intervention and support for kids as part of preventive services. I don't see any more.
I think I saw one actually.
Okay, there might be one or two more questions.
Timeline request.
Okay.
So in terms of the timeline for the inclusive early education, it's something that the Special Ed Division and the Early Learning and Care Division at CDE are both being very collaborative in. As Kristen mentioned, we're planning on releasing the $10 million for the County Office of Education Coordination Program first. This grant is really intended to support the work that LEAs are doing in the other program, and so we wanted to get that one out first. Also, that funding has a bit of a shorter life. We're still working on clarifying exactly what that timeline looks like internally, because this is an area where we're so happy to get this new opportunity from the legislature, but no new staff were added to CDE. And so we're moving these two new grants forward as quickly as we can and hope to have more information to share with you soon in terms of the timeline.
Great. We have one more question, and thank you for engaging in this conversation and Q&A. As part of the early inclusion movement, has there been any discussion about changing admission priorities with CCTR to allow for the enrollment of over-income children who have IFSP similar to CCSP?
So thank you so much for that question. So I think what's being referenced is that there is that ability in the part-day state preschool program. The challenge in the CCTR program is that is more federal funds through the Child Care and Development Fund are being used there, and there are specific requirements from the federal government that we have to follow when using their funds. Currently, we have none of those funds in part-day state preschool, which allows us more flexibility in terms of changing the eligibility rules. So in the CCTR program, the federal government, since we're using their funds, won't allow us to increase the eligibility threshold higher than 85% of SMI. And so to the extent that the legislature continues to put these child care development funds from the federal government in that program, we're going to continue to be limited in that regard.
But we will continue to provide that feedback to our federal partners.
Yes, it's a priority for us.
Yes.
Great, and we have a couple more questions. Thank you for bringing those questions along, so it's helpful for all the participants. Did I hear you correctly that the recommendation to have visual supervision at all times may be incorporated into the Title V update?
Yes, you did hear me correctly. So in terms of going back to that part of the presentation, so based on the LAO stakeholder work group recommendations, CDE is required to write regulations that will require programs to do all of a certain list. And I'm just going to share that list since I think we have some time. So the first one is outdoor shades must be safe and in good repair. The second one is that drinking water must be accessible and readily available throughout the day. The third one is that safe and sanitary restroom facilities have to have at least one toilet and hand washing fixture for every 15 children. That restroom facilities are only available for preschoolers and kindergartners, so you can't have, say, a third grader that's using the same facility. Visual supervision of children at all times. This is similar to the rules that currently exist in licensing with state preschool and beyond. And the last one is that indoor and outdoor space must be properly contained or fenced and provide suitable space for the number of children using the space at any given time. Furthermore, playground equipment needs to be safe, in good repair, and age appropriate. So these are the things that the legislature has specifically required the Department of Education to put out regulations about. Obviously, in some cases, those are more specific. In some cases, there's some more work that CDE is needing to do to figure out what those regulations look like and what that guidance looks like. We did have some input at our June State Superintendent of Public Instruction meeting on what these regulations might look like. We're obviously very happy to hear any additional ongoing feedback you all might have as we develop these regulations. Our preliminary timeline is that we would be able to share the regulations more broadly in January of next year, January 2019, and we definitely want to be engaging the field in an iterative process on these to make sure the full range of perspectives is included, but we're also sort of bound by our statutory requirement to look at all of those items and include all of those items I listed in the regulations.
And I'll just mention, thank you for that response. This really was, I would say, a compromise in looking at an opportunity for school districts and local educational agencies in general, or those who have Title V or Field Act compliant facilities. How do we ensure that there's no duplication or additional requirements between Title V and Title 22, so that for those school districts and other providers who provide local county offices and others who provide preschool programs, they can be seen, the oversight be under Title V as opposed to the Department of Social Services with Title 22. And so what Virginia described are opportunities to better align the two systems as the Department of Education would be conducting that oversight through Title V moving forward. There's a couple of other questions that have come in. I think generally speaking, there's a question again about timelines and RFAs. When will they be due? And I believe that that question has already been addressed. The question was about how to, the quick turnaround to be supporting county offices and school districts with the application process. Again, roughly in the next couple of weeks, sometime in the next month, would you say, for any of these different, there's even multiple applications, so it's hard to say, just one application timeline.
I can tell you it will not be out in the next week.
No.
Yeah.
We're trying to get a lot of funding out right now. And so I would say at the very least, it'll probably be another 3 weeks to a month before we see the first one coming out. Which,
yeah.
And can you please remind the audience where will they be able to find which listserv, or how can they find out deadlines for application opportunities when they come out?
So I believe one of our slides has that information. We do have a listserv, and we'll make sure that we send that information about how to subscribe to our listservs. I believe both the Special Ed Division and the Early Learning Division has a listserv, and we'll make sure Martha has that information to share out with all of you.
Great. And then there was a question about what is the name of the grant opportunity. Well, there's different grant opportunities discussed here today. One of the major ones that Kristen touched on was the Inclusive Early Education Expansion Grant Program, but there's also, that's for local educational agencies, including district and county offices. That one does not include charter schools. I'm looking at the language, just to making that clarification. And the other one that Kristen talked about was the Early Learning Inclusion Pilot Program for County Office of Education. But there's also funding for full-day facilities for kindergarten, for full-day access. So as I mentioned beforehand, we'll be posting a handout, a 2-page fact sheet on the ACSA website, where you can download after today's webinar. We can also probably post a PowerPoint from today's presentation from CDE, so you can access the materials. And then there's information on there who to contact for additional questions that are not answered today. There was a question, can I find additional information on the grading of TK with the state preschool on the website, or will there be additional discussions to follow?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. We are currently working on developing guidance for the field on that. So it's not posted yet, but it will hopefully come very shortly.
The other question, by applying for a full-day CCSESA program, is it expected that programs will run full year as well?
For the additional funding?
Yes.
Yes, that is the expectation. So currently our full-day state preschool program is I believe, more than 4 hours a day for 246 minimum days of operation.
Although the regulations do allow an opportunity for the field to negotiate with CDE if there's any local circumstances that do not allow you to provide 246 days, it's something that can be discussed with your CDE analyst, it's my understanding. And it's an issue that we at ACSA are looking at very closely, given that we understand there are some limitations with the calendaring for TK to 12th grade, and how that 246 day is not consistent with the 180 school days of instructional time for the rest of the school year. So we're exploring opportunities to reconsider and reevaluate the requirement for the time being, as Virginia mentioned, is 246 days per current law.
So just a couple more things on that I want to highlight. So that 112 million that Stephen mentioned, that can be for both part day or full day. Obviously, the legislature has a priority for full day care, so we'll definitely be using those priorities when as we're developing our RFA and as we're looking at the applications. So that's sort of there's a broader spectrum available for LEAs, but those are the priorities. I also just want to go back and touch on something I mentioned earlier with the recently passed legislation. A lot of this recently passed legislation makes it much easier for programs to operate state preschool programs or general child care programs. And specifically, some of the barriers that we've heard about that have made districts or other LEAs not want to run these programs, for example, the funding rates or the facilities or some other things we've heard, the difficulties with TK and integrating that. We're really seeing now that it's much easier for, say, a district that wants to blend expanded transitional kindergarten with state preschool. Now there's language that specifies exactly what that would look like. For a district that wants to serve children that are 3 years old in state preschool and children that are 4 years old in transitional kindergarten, now with AB 2626, that's a possibility, whereas before you had to have at least half of your children in state preschool be 4 years old, and so that requirement has been removed. So, and plus we've seen recent massive increases in the standard reimbursement rate for state preschool. So we're hoping that these changes, the making licensing and the health and safety requirements a little bit easier for school districts. We're hoping that these changes combined will make it easier for you all to engage in this program and apply for this funding.
Great. A couple more questions, I think, related to the Title 22 and Title 5 changes. First, when can we expect to implement those requirements that CDE is providing about health and safety regulations? And I think a related question to that, regarding the Title 22 barrier to inclusion, how can they get more information about when the guidance from CDE will be ready for implementation?
So the statute for the state preschool license exemption goes into effect July 1, 2019. So that's when statutorily LEAs that meet the requirements, again, they have to be Field Act compliant, they have to follow the California Building Standards Code, they have to basically follow the rules for kindergarten classrooms and for the state preschool programs in general. They still have to use all the same state preschool ratios, for example. Starting July 1st, 2019, that change goes into effect. CDE is working to have the regulations in place for these additional health and safety standards in place before July 1 so that folks can seamlessly transition from one to the other. We have also been given we've been given authority to adopt emergency regulations as needed. We're currently just following the normal regulations process, but if it seems like that's taking too long, we will switch to an emergency regulations process, which is a little bit quicker, so that we can have that in place by July 1, 2019, when that change takes effect. And one of the good things about this change is that some of the issues that come up around licensing with inclusion will become a little bit easier for school districts.
Great. Two more questions that might be for Virginia, but definitely I'll be asking Kristen before we wrap up in the next 10 minutes, one about inclusion. So the question is it true that centers, will only be license exempt if they only serve 4-year-olds? So serving 3-year-olds would mean you are still beholden to licensing?
That is correct.
And definitely, we welcome your feedback. That's what Virginia mentioned for current law. There's opportunities for barriers that you believe need to be considered in the future. Let us know. But in the meantime, that is still a requirement. Does a TK teacher require a child development permit for the pre-TK and TK class combination?
Yes, so basically what we did when working with the legislature on that language is all the requirements that are in place on a transitional kindergarten teacher would be the requirements of the class. So currently the transitional kindergarten teacher has a requirement that they have a teaching credential from the CTC, as well as a child development permit or some sort of equivalent experience. Those same requirements will apply to these layered classrooms.
Great. And then the other piece, so I think we might be done with the questions from the chat box, but I do want to, in the last minutes we have left, ask Kristen, given your role as the director of the Special Education Division of the Department of Education, do you have any other insights for the individuals on the line today on the webinar regarding what you've seen about the integration of general education and special ed, early education programs? Any insights you'd like to share with them as what California's vision and what you would hope encourage them to do more of that interaction, best practices so far that you have seen?
So I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of early education settings across the state, and one of the things that strikes me is a notion that children need to earn their way into inclusion. And I can appreciate the specialized instruction and for children with specific types of disabilities that require, say, for example, ABA or other things. But I think one of the things we have to remember that there is no pre-qualifier to be included with your peers. And the intent under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is that every child has opportunities from the beginning. And so to the degree that we can work collaboratively and hopefully with this influx of funding, with the providing more flexibility and hopefully breaking the barriers down. And if you find that there are continuing to be barriers, I hope that you'll come back and let us know so that we can continue to work on those, because I think what we see now is a huge statewide commitment to ensure that every kid has great opportunities early. So as we're moving into the future of this coherent system of education, we're trying to be good role models at the department in terms of our collaborative efforts. And again, we want to make sure that there are less barriers for you, not more. So we need your feedback and appreciate the partnerships through ACSA and CCSESA to make sure that we get that information back to us. So if something's not rolling out as intended, or you're finding that there are statutory barriers in place that we can help to address as well, or regulatory barriers that we can help describe to our policymakers, we really, really hope that you'll let us know. And again, thank you for all the work you're doing in California, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. So I'll have some concluding remarks. We anticipate that in 2019 here in Sacramento, there'll be significant interest on the topic of early education and expansion in California. There will be a new governor, there'll be a new state superintendent of public instruction, and there will also be reports that will be released by the Assembly Speaker, Blue Ribbon Commission on Early Childhood Education. That report will likely come out sometime in the spring between March and April of 2019. so there'll be a lot of strong interest in looking at opportunities to further expand access for working class families and middle class families in California for the prevention benefits that we talked about before, the early interventions to support children and their readiness to come to school, socially, cognitively, and ready to engage in the classroom setting. With that said, I want to thank my colleagues here today for presenting on behalf of CDE. CCSESA and ACSA, we have been partners on this work for the last several years in working to eliminate some of those barriers. You've heard about these funding opportunities from CDE today, so we encourage you to stay engaged, to give us your feedback, to please consider applying for these funding opportunities. And if you happen to be a principal or school site leader, early education director, to encourage your school district leadership, superintendent, deputies, and others to look about partnerships to be able to expand access in your own communities to better serve California kids. You'll see a handout, 2 pages, very short, with the information that was shared today by CDE today. We want to make this accessible to you to be able to have the information that you need. So that will be posted on the website along with other materials. But thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day and a good week. Thank you.